Hello. This presentation had a different name before, but we ended up going in a different direction. So now it is called Handcrafted Email Components. My name is Carlos and I'm a senior brand designer at Customer.io. I am doing this presentation along with Mark, who is our developer advocate for all things email. You're all here watching Customer.io's Unpack 2026, so I'll skip the part where I tell you what our company does. I do need to point out three things about how we work with email at Customer.io. First is that our email design system is built with Design Studio, our proprietary email editor. You might also know Design Studio as a standalone product parcel. Second is that marketers at Customer.io self-serve all their emails without any assistance from a developer or a designer. We only step in for unique designs like our year-end review or unpacked emails. And third is that our brand team QAs every single email without exception. Marketers self-serve all of their emails. I wrote down marketers, but this applies to anyone sending any kind of email, whether it's PMs working on transactional emails or folks on our people ops team sending internal emails. They all use our ADS to build their emails with very little training. About the brand team doing QA of every single email, we know this isn't common, but it has become essential to how we iterate on our EDS. QA is mandatory for all emails, from monthly newsletters to 24 nurture emails. The volume is manageable since QA takes 2 to 3 minutes per email. You might still be wondering, why mandatory? Isn't that an overkill? Well, this happened by accident. When we rolled out our rebrand in early 2024, I suggested to my manager that we temporarily make QA mandatory to ensure consistent use of the EDS. But by QAing every single email, I started to get constant insights into what was working and what wasn't. These insights translated to constant small tweaks to the EDS. I could understand what marketers wanted in real time, even when they weren't expressing it directly. In QA, I also found an opportunity to give more detailed recommendations to people on how to improve their email layouts. If I ran into a long paragraph, I would record a 30-second loom showing how I split them up and highlighted words for visual interest. Or maybe I would take a screenshot and annotate it to explain the changes that I did to a layout. The more recommendations I made, the shorter QA became and the better emails looked. So instead of phasing out mandatory QA, we kept it as an ongoing overview of how our EDS is actually used. With the first version of the EDS, we created a dedicated Slack channel, standard stuff, mostly for updates. As folks noticed how proactive we were with their feedback, the channel naturally became an open space where everyone, not just me or Mark, shared feedback, questions, and perspectives. These two spaces, QA and the Slack channel, are where we passively source ideas for components. If a simple component is needed, I build and ship it myself. Side note, I don't design for email in Figma. By designing inside Design Studio, I already know the output works within email's many constraints. If it's a more complex component we're talking about, I reach out to Mark. He and I go back and forth for a bit and usually ship things within a week or two. These are the handcrafted email components this presentation is about. The handcrafted components I am about to show you are hyper-specific to our organization. They are powerful, opinionated, and always being tinkered with. I'll walk you through 3 components. Then we'll have Mark go over recent improvements on a 4th component. First, our image component, used for all full-width body images. By default, it adds size padding on desktop and rounded corners, basic stuff. Let's replace the image. Many of the images we include in emails are in-product screenshots, like this one. These often are mostly white, just like the background of the email, so the contrast is not ideal. The first feature we added to this component was the Include Border toggle. With it, users can add a subtle border that helps separate the image from the background. Now, let's say I want to share a video in this email. Usually, we have a screenshot of the video and have the image linked to the video in our docs or YouTube. But this doesn't signal clearly enough that it is a thumbnail. I had made a Figma component for a video overlay, but barely anyone used it. I ended up adding overlays myself during QA. Instead of nagging users about this or taking on more work, I pitched to Mark the idea of enabling adding a video overlay directly in the image component. We got to work and shipped the Include Video Overlay toggle. With it, users can turn any screenshot into a video thumbnail with a single click. Mark went out of his way to add a hover animation to really reinforce that the image is clickable. No more reminding people about obscure Figma assets. Our first dopamine hit from building hyper-specific features. Next, our signature component. Initially, it was very simple: drag, drop, fill in info. But users had to fill it in every time, and I constantly dealt with questionably cropped photos. We tackled this by having an universal signature component. With it, users can just pick their name from a dropdown and all their details would show up. No one would need to rewrite their personal info again, and all photos look crisp and on brand. We made it so that pronoun info could be hidden, and if they wanted to not show their beautiful faces, users can make it a plain old text signature with a click. The team was excited, but we quickly realized that marketers had caught on to the power of handcrafted components. They demanded even more options. Cody, our director of demand, wanted different title variants for different audiences. And during QA, I noticed marketers kept using the original component to add custom quirky titles. To address this, we added a custom title toggle. Flick it on and the title becomes editable. No new variants or dropdowns needed. The update was a crowd pleaser. Okay, next one is a beefy one. Our header component was already pretty robust when it launched. Users could toggle hero images, switch between light and dark variants, and disable the login call to action we added. Marketers ran tests and the login call to action performed great with overall higher conversion and click-through rates. So marketers loved it, but they were quick to point out something that they were not thrilled about. In Slack and QA, people repeatedly asked to reduce the header's height to optimize mobile's above default area. This led to a series of incremental changes. In mobile, we removed the negative space above the header, tweaked the overall height of the header, and changed the recommended height of hero images. In total, we reduced the height of the header by 80 pixels. And for the cherry on top, Mark made the login call to action fully customizable. To announce these changes, we went full silly with our launch campaign. The humor got people's attention, but what got them excited was recognizing their own requests and pain points reflected in the actual features we built. Alright, enough of me. Let's see what Mark is up to with the last component.
Hi, thanks for that, Carlos. Yes, so I'm Mark, and it's time for us to get our geek on. I'm going to take you into a deep dive or deep space adventure into our button component. Now, firstly, from a developer point of view, from an accessibility point of view, we're talking about a link and not a button. Those semantics matter to me as a developer. It probably matters to some of you as well. However, more importantly, in this case, we're thinking about the user experience for the people using our email design system, and that's our marketing team. So for that reason, we're calling it a button because that's a term that they're more familiar with. So buttons are one of the most used components. It will appear multiple times in most emails. So the goal here is to make it really simple and easy to use. And we do that by limiting the options. So if we look at our button component here, we have just 3 options. You can set a link, you can have a few variants on it: primary, secondary, tertiary, multiple choice. So it's really easy to switch the design around, but also we're limiting it so it stays on brand. We're not allowing people to change the borders or change the colors at all. And we also have an option to include captions. So one of the first things I want to look at here is the text. As you can see, as I change the variant, the default text is different on each one. This makes it easy to understand which variant you've selected, so you know which one you're on as you're starting out with your button. But once the text is changed, then that stays and it sticks across variants. So as you're changing it, if you want to make a quick update, go, oh, maybe this should be a secondary button, not primary, that's quick and it's easy, and that text stays the same. And the same thing goes with the link value. It remains as we change the variants. So if I switch over to the code, we can see how this works. We can see our props and our href within that for setting the link. Then if I do a find, you can see that props.href is repeated multiple times, and that's always going to give the same value. So every time where we see this props.href, that's going to result in the same value that's entered through the visual editor. Then if we look at the slots, we can see the slot wraps the default text, and this default text is different each time. But once that slot text is set, then that will replace the default text, and that slot text will be used across the variants. Now we have a few variants here. In a previous version, we also had a separate variant for using on a dark background, which is part of our design system. But this version, we have updated that, so we do that automatically. If you see here that as I drag the button from a light background to the dark background, it will change the styling to fit. And if I switch it to a secondary variant, we'll still keep that dark styling as we don't have a secondary dark version currently, but we could add that at a later date. So the way this works, we do this using a context. On the dark background component, we set a context of dark to be true. Then on our button component, we read that context, and if we find a dark context to be true, we set is dark true. Otherwise we default to a false value there. Then we look at the variant we're going to use. We see if the props.variant is set to primary dark. This is a value from the legacy code, so we want to make sure everything's still backwards compatible. Particularly if somebody has an old email, they duplicate it, it might still have that code in it. So we just want to make sure that's still supported if they have that. Then we check that it's not a multiple variant, because that works on both light and dark values. And if the is dark from the context is set to true, then we'll set the dark variant. Otherwise, we use the variant that is set from the props. And that's just, the variants are wrapped in these fragment elements, and a fragment is just an invisible bit of code that is only for the component and will never be seen in the output. So from the context point of view, this is a relatively simple use of context. We're just passing a simple true-false value down. But you can do a lot more. A context can hold a whole object full of loads of information, pass it between components, and do some really clever and complex things. It's massively powerful and I think quite an underused feature. Another thing to mention here is if we were to add a different type of dark container, like a dark header, dark footer, dark callout section, we could then set that context in there as well. So when the button drops into that, that will automatically do it. Or if we were to have a nested light component inside our dark container and then we'll drop a button there, we can reset it on the light container, so then we set it back to be the light variant. We've also just added a caption feature to the button. This is a simple toggle to add an additional text slot. This was added as a way to add a description or a secondary alternative link next to the primary CTA without having a second button close by, because sometimes it looks a bit off having the two buttons next to each other, even if one's primary, one's secondary. It gives a lot of weight to that secondary, whereas a little caption with a link would be sort of more of an aside. When the caption is turned on, which we can see if we just adjust the default value there, you see that adds in, it adds a paragraph at the bottom here. So this is just a simple if props.caption, so if that's true, that paragraph gets added. And inside that we have a text slot with a name of caption. So if we look at our slots, we have this second slot here with name of caption. So we're defining two slots, one text slot for the content of the button and one text slot for the caption. Additionally, we are also adding a margin. So our bottom margin, which will normally appear below the button, now needs to go below the caption. So here we're saying bottom margin, if there's a caption, then we're setting a small margin, otherwise we set the large margin. And then our margin calculations are used in this extra margin at the bottom, whether we have the small or large, and then that's also passed onto the caption here with the bottom margin. So accessibility is a big priority of mine personally, and as part of the email design system, and as Design Studio as a whole, it's quite important for us. So we wanted to make sure we're getting the correct programmatic relationship between the component and the caption. With the image, we use figure and caption, which is pretty standard HTML, which has been around for a long time. With the button, we're using aria-described-by. So this is saying this button is described by this piece of text. So to do this, we need to generate a unique ID so we can link the caption to the button. And to do this, I used a bit of AI to be able to generate this unique ID. I tested it a lot and it came out unique every time. I also asked the AI to help explain to me how unique this is and how likely it is to repeat, and some various pieces like that to help me make sure this is as unique as possible. That ID then gets added to the aria-described-by attribute on the button and as an ID on the caption. So if we look at DevTools, we can see how this relationship works. The link has the content RSVP and the caption, can't attend live, register and we'll send you the recording. So that gives us that extra information, that extra little description of the link. But also from an accessibility point of view, it's giving it to people using assistive technology as well. This isn't going to work everywhere. A number of email clients will actively remove or break these accessible relationships. Now that's a whole other talk and a big long rant I could go on. But this is still a good progressive enhancement because where it works, it works. So that brings me nicely onto QA. Carlos mentioned earlier that the brand team QA all the emails. For components, we'll both look at it. Carlos will be looking at the branding and designing. And to be honest, most of the time he's done that before I get there. So I don't see that process too much. But when I get it, I'll test the component across email clients and assistive technologies. If we've got properties on there, I'll test it with all the different properties, different combinations of properties. Also testing it with other components, particularly when it's going to be nested inside different components and what it might be nested inside, or what might be nested inside the component I'm building. So just testing all these different variations on it. So this robust testing at this component stage means we can be more confident that this component will work in the emails that we send. Now, sometimes bugs will come up and we'll need to fix it directly on the components. Sometimes it might be elsewhere in the design system in the way that components interact with each other. And sometimes it's deeper than that. It needs to be fixed in Design Studio. So, for example, in this last round of updates, I found an edge case with extra spacing on an image component when you had border and border radius together and you wanted something to sit directly below it. That's fixed now. We discovered this by doing an update by adding a caption under the image, and we wanted to get the positioning just right. But we discovered that and we fixed it, and now everybody who uses Design Studio is benefiting from that. Now I'm in quite a unique position here in that I make updates to our design system and also the underlying framework within Design Studio. So, but it's worth mentioning, most people aren't in that situation. But still, it is good feeding this information back to the tools that you're using. Let us know if you found something that doesn't look quite right and you found a bug, let us know. We'll fix it. I want to fix it. I want this to be really good. I want it to be a solid product. But same, if you're using any of our competitors, people do like this feedback. They appreciate it. So just let people know. Be nice about it. Give as much information as possible. Here's a screenshot of what I wanted. Here's a screenshot of what I got, here's the code I used, and any other sort of relevant information around that. So it's really useful for sort of making email better. So also things in email can change overnight. Email clients ship updates all the time. They don't give us release notes. They don't give us advance warning. They'll just ship an update and it might start breaking your layouts. So one of our goals is always to be very quick to react to things like this, both in the design system and in Design Studio as a whole. So getting this feedback is very valuable. Sometimes I've tested this, but something's changed, so I need to make these fixes. And the way our components are set up as small bits of code or atoms, if we're going to use design system language, it isolates the code into manageable chunks. So it does make it very easy to make these updates, and it's a lot quicker to update these things. And then that can get shipped to all our emails when we just publish to all of them. Building handcrafted emails like this takes time, but only really in the short term. Long term, this saves so much time. Marketers can make emails faster. QA per email is lightning speed, and updating and iterating on the design system is faster because we've put the work in beforehand. And I know some email developers are going to be looking at this and seeing the JavaScripts that I've included there, and it can scare some email devs occasionally. But if you can write a query in Liquid or Handlebars or AmpScript or whatever tools you're using, there's a lot of overlap with JavaScript. And also AI is a great tool here. AI understands JavaScript. It's a well-established language. It's been around for a long time. Unlike email, JavaScript has good quality, detailed, consistent documentation, official spec that it can learn from. So these sort of AI tools can learn from this really easily, whereas email is such a black box that things are changing all the time. There's so many unknowns, different approaches. It's very hard for AI to learn that, but JavaScript is very solid. So thanks a lot for that, and I'm just going to pass back to Carlos.
Thank you, Mark. Earlier, I mentioned we passively source component ideas through QA and Slack. Our EDS doesn't grow through formal reviews or big redesigns. It evolves organically through feedback loops that keep brand, developers, and marketers in constant, low-friction conversation. As a sole owner of the EDS with limited time, this collaborative environment makes it sustainable. The system thrives not because of perfect planning, but because we've created a space where everyone feels invested in making it better. Two parting thoughts. 1. Embrace your inner EDS sicko. Don't be afraid to build handcrafted components that address your team's hyper-specific needs. 2. Considering fostering lightweight feedback loops where brand developers and marketers naturally talk about what's working and what isn't. Hopefully, the collaborative energy will carry your system forward even when resources are tight. So yeah, you could say the real components were the friends we made along the way. That is it, folks. Now our future selves would take questions from the audience. Thank you.